that's been accumulating around his lungs. And Jesus is dead at that point, and Roman executioners don't make those kind of mistakes. Jesus was dead, he was sentenced to death, and they executed him. So the video's there. I want to say it's about 14 minutes long, something like that. If you want to see that on the website, we put it out there, and it's just available to anybody that wants to see it. Okay, let's move on to the next lesson, the voyage to Rome. This is quite an adventure. Is there anybody in here that has sailing experience? I'm hoping. Do we have any sailors? So when you sail against the wind, is that called tacking? When you have to go kind of at an angle back and forth? Alex says yes. Are you a sailor? You live by the sea. Okay, well, you're familiar with it a little bit. But it's interesting to kind of note the direction of the wind in this chapter, and there's some of those kinds of hints about what they're going through. So this first map is really the path that he took. And I'll point out a couple things along the way. They start here in Caesarea. They sail to Sidon. It says they go around the lee, and I wanted to make sure I got that terminology right. So the lee is the downwind side from wherever the wind is blowing. So if you're sailing on the lee and the wind's blowing from the south, you're going to be on the north side. So the lee is away from the wind, and there's several places here where it mentions about sailing through the lee in the shelter of an island. They go past Cyprus, they go to Myra, Cnidus, they come here past Salmone, and end up at Fair Havens. They hope to get to Phoenix to winter. And we'll look at some timeline information here in just a minute. I'm just going to give you a quick overview. They go south of Cauda. They're scared to death they're going to end up down here, and we'll talk about that. And the storm rages and blows them along, and they end up wrecking the ship at Malta. So this is just a super exciting passage to read, and we're going to follow along. First, we're going to look at this video, Sailing Along the Coast with Dr. Manor.
After Paul's discussion with Festus and Agrippa and Bernice, they gather together and they decide, we don't see any reason for him to go to Caesar, but he's appealed to Caesar. To Caesar he will go. So Paul is put in transport on a ship, and the Bible tells us in the narration in Acts 27, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in an Adramyttian ship, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we put out to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. From there we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. The discussion here begins, the trip begins in Caesarea, and this is a picture of the port of Caesarea as it now exists. It originally was much larger, but because of deterioration and silting and so forth and so on, the current port is smaller. But this is essentially where Paul begins the trip on that ship. Ships in the ancient world were not passenger ships. Apparently they didn't really have those kinds of things, but people could hire fare on a ship and travel along, but the ships were primarily intended for trade or the movement of goods. And there are two basic kinds. There would be the ships that carry goods from one place to another, and then there were specialized ships that would carry specialized products such as grain, and we'll talk about that at a later point. The picture we're looking at is off of a sarcophagus from Sidon, and it shows the depiction of a ship, probably very similar to what Paul is on as they're making this trip. But as they make the trip, they're going to go sort of bouncing along the coast. The photograph here shows the remnant of a ship that was discovered off the coast of Caesarea. And this is only about a 40-foot long boat, not a ship in the sense that we normally would think in terms of these, but finding these is not easy to do because obviously they're out in the middle of the ocean and many of them are way too deep to access very easily. So we don't have a whole lot of examples, so we have to rely upon what few that have been discovered as well as artistic depictions. As we think in terms of the trip, the map that we're looking at here shows sort of the stylized trip as they go from Caesarea to Sidon, and then it shows them sort of zipping around Cyprus in order to make their way further to the end of Anatolia. But the probability is that they would have stopped at different places along the way, trading goods, exchanging goods, offloading some of the trade items, and then taking other trade items on and traveling further. Some shipwrecks have been found, and one of the wonderful values of shipwrecks is that they give us some insight into the kinds of everyday life that characterize the people. The photograph here is of a shipwreck that was discovered a number of years ago, and you'll notice these large storage jars that are in there. And this is an example of one of these that would have been found in similar fashion. This would be used to transport oil or wine from one location to another. And as you look at the photograph, you can see examples of a number of these still in the water. It is this kind of boat that Paul apparently is initially on, but he's going to make a transition to another kind that's going to ultimately end up in a shipwreck. But Paul is not, he's a privileged prisoner in the sense that the centurion is allowing him some opportunities, allows him to go ashore, and friends take care of him. And not all the prisoners would have that privilege, but Paul, being a Roman citizen and having to appeal to Rome, and probably because Festus and Bernice and Agrippa have recognized that this is a non-issue, at least as far as the Romans are concerned, have probably given him license to be treated kindly.
Okay. Some insights as to the boat itself. Let's read the first couple of verses here in 27 as we get into the text. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. A couple things to note here. And I thought probably the best way for us to do this, to go through this material, would be to, rather than just read a big section of scripture and then look at the pictures, I intersperse them a little bit more tightly so that we can kind of follow the story as they go. So here's a model of a Roman merchant ship, and you can see, as Dr. Mander indicated with the archaeological remains of a ship that they had found, it's about that size. I mean, you couldn't put a whole lot of people on there. Some of them call them coastal ships. In fact, I think the next one, yeah, they call them a coastal boat. You could have a few people on there, but not a lot. So they're made for coming into ports quickly, staying close to the coast, and working along as you go. This is an aerial shot of the harbor, and I kind of like this shot because it shows us where Paul was. So this is Herod's Praetorium. This is that palace, that area that we looked at several times. It had the private quarters down here, and Paul had his hearing right around in here someplace. And this is the port. So they would have just gone right up this way to board the ship. There was an opening in the breakwater here where ships could come in and out. Do you remember when we talked about this port before? Kind kind of the general direction that trade ships followed in the Mediterranean? Do you remember? It was kind of counterclockwise. So they would sail across the northern coast of Africa, come up on the east side there near Caesarea, then go up along Asia Minor and around to Italy. And that's kind of the circuit that a lot of the trade ships would follow. There's the ancient harbor. So you can kind of get a sense of how, and the information that I saw said that there was 40 acres that were enclosed in this breakwater. So it was a large breakwater with these pylons that had been built here to protect the harbor. And you would come in here on this side, the north side. You can see the Roman temple here, the hippodrome. There's a theater right there. And of course, this is the governor's palace. Okay, let's continue on verse 3. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. So this Julius was over a cohort. Do you remember how many people were in a cohort? The centurion was over a cohort. So it was about a tenth of a legion, okay? So it changed a little bit from time to time. The word that's used here for cohort is, cohort's also used when Jesus is taken in before the soldiers. You'll remember it describes him as being taken before a cohort. And I always found that interesting because I kind of grew up thinking, well, there was 10, 15 soldiers that were mocking Jesus and beating him. There was nearly 600. If in fact it's a cohort, right? So there was a lot of people, a lot of abuse being directed at Jesus during his crucifixion. So that cohort number is kind of interesting to look at. And Julius is over that group. So we know the name of the person, the centurion, the soldier that's guarding Paul. He gives him some leave, some care, to allow his friends to take care of him. Here's the fishing harbor at Sidon. There's 2 harbors at Sidon. This is the northern harbor. The southern harbor is sometimes called the Egyptian harbor. It's much smaller, and there's no archaeological evidence of piers or docks or anything like that that would indicate that it was used for shipping or as any kind of a working harbor. So when it says he set it at Sidon, it was probably this location. Okay, let's continue on. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. Let's see how far I'm going to read that. I'm going to stop right there. So here's the northern coast of Cyprus. So if the winds were against them and they're coming around, they were trying to get behind the island, the lee of the island, so they could make some progress. So this is the northern coast of Cyprus. Again, we noted this when he was ending his 3rd missionary journey and he's traveling along these areas. There's just some stunningly beautiful scenery that's along there. I can't help but wonder what's running through Paul's mind as he sails along in this boat. What's waiting for him? What's next? How will the Lord provide for him? And I think he has a lot of faith that God will provide for him. And you kind of see the way he conducts himself on board the ship in a few more verses, which is pretty interesting as well. So here's the northern coast of Cyprus. Here's the coast of Pamphylia, which is modern-day Italia, Turkey. Our daughter, Katie, took a group from Washington University on a mission trip, and they went to Italia. And so it was very, very interesting. It's predominantly Muslim now, so if you're a Christian, you kind of keep your head down a little bit. But it's a beautiful and interesting area. Okay, and we talked about, landing at Myra. So this is the harbor at Myra Andreas, which is largely silted over now. It's not really much of a harbor just because of the way the silt changes things in harbors over the centuries. But this is what that ancient harbor looked like, and you can kind of see in the distance the Mediterranean right up here. But this is all just kind of a silted area, kind of boggy. What? Y'all can't see my pointer? Thank you, Mike. Right along here. I'll get it right. I thought this was interesting because it talked about this being them transferring to a ship that hauled grain, and this is it's called Hadrian's granary at Adria's Myra, which was the harbor area. So this is what a granary would have looked like, where they would have stored large quantities that are being shipped or traded. And you get another. I'm turning around. You get another view of how boggy and silty this looks right here. Okay, let's keep going. Next few verses. Yes, Don.
Do you happen to know, you hear a lot about granary and you know they ship, where do they grow most of the grain? I know.
That's a good question. Yeah, so Don asks, where did they grow the grain that they shipped here? I'm not really sure. That'd be a good question. Good bit of research. For next time, I'll see if I can find out. Good question. Let's pick it up in 6. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Okay, so let's kind of follow this along. So it says that they went to Cnidus. Well, first of all, he found this ship. Where was the ship from? Alexandria. So down in Egypt. I remember this because when we studied the book of Ephesus and looked at the Library of Celsus. I was trying to remember the name of the library in Ephesus. The Library of Celsus. It was like the second or third largest library at the time in Ephesus. Do you remember what the largest library in the world was at that time? Where it was? Alexandria. So if you wanted to do research and study and good schooling, you went to Alexandria because of the size of the library. So this ship is from Alexandria. Where's it headed, it says? It's headed for Italy. Obviously why Julius the centurion picked it, because that should get him there. This is a dinky little ship. Yes or no? We're cheating. We're looking ahead. Let's look ahead. Verse 37. 276 people were on board this ship. Now, that's got to be a lot bigger boat than what these little coastal traders that they were on, sailing along from spot to spot. 276 people on this boat. So it's a much larger ship than what they were using before. And this one, apparently a grain ship, it's hauling grain, and they're going to be sailing to Italy on this ship. So they stop at Cnidus, it says went slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty. They couldn't go any further because of the wind, and they went to the lee off Crete. There's another, some of the harbors at Sanitas. Some of these island harbors are really protected, and you'll see them kind of jump from harbor to harbor as they're trying to make progress towards Italy. So here's some of the harbors at Sanitas. So here is Crete, and it mentions we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone, and they're not really sure where Salmone was. Could have been a couple places. Here's Fair Havens. We're going to talk about that in a second. And here's Phoenix. So here is Cape Codero, which is one of the places that could be Salmone. And you can kind of see it's got a harbor area here. Looks very tropical, doesn't it? And Fair Havens. Coasting along with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. And Lasea is just over in this area. Yeah, it's always fun to make this stuff real. And so when they were talking here in just a second about Phoenix, going to Phoenix, I looked it up, and the picture's really interesting, but I noticed in the picture, real tiny, it looks like a 15-unit condominium in Phoenix now. And I thought, wow, what a cool place to stay, right? To go and stay in the condo at Phoenix, where Paul intended to winter. And so, you know, you go online, you look it up, and you can. It's not really expensive. It's like $130 a night for someplace on Phoenix. Some of those places, some of those islands there, it'll cost you upwards of $500 a night to stay. But interestingly, at Phoenix, there are no roads to Phoenix. You can't get there by road. You can't fly there by plane. You have to fly to a nearby town. They can take you by water taxi near Phoenix, but you've got about a 15-minute walk to actually get there. Some of the hotels and the condos have services where they will come and get you with a small boat and take you and your luggage there. I thought, wow, that would be an interesting tour, though, wouldn't it? To retrace Paul's travels that he followed. But this is Fair Havens, and you can kind of see that's a pretty protected harbor where he landed. There's Fair Havens, and you can see Lasea off in the distance. I'm going to turn right here. It's Lasea, and this is Fair Havens right in this area. Okay, let's go 9 through 12. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So it says much time passed in verse 9. We don't know how much that was. Let's jump to Leviticus 16 really quick and find out when they were to observe the Day of Atonement. It calls it the fast here. Leviticus 16, if I can get there. And verse 29, 31. And it shall be a statute to you forever, that in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict yourselves, and shall do no work, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse you. You shall be clean before the Lord from all your sins. It is a Sabbath of solemn rest to you, and you shall afflict yourselves. It is a statute forever. So this was a day of atonement when their sins were atoned for. They were clean, as it says here, before God. And it was a very special day for them. And it was which month? 7th Jewish month, which is not July for us. We'll look at a chart here in a second. And what day of the month? The 10th. So, and we can look at those other references. They share similar information. So I like this chart. This is good. It kind of translates things for me. So here's the 7th month, Tishri, in the Hebrew lunar months, which is September, October for us. So the 10th would have been, right around in there someplace, maybe towards the end of September, early October. It says the fast was over, so my guess is they're well into October at this point, and not the best time to be sailing. You'll notice that it's the rainy season here, and not the best time. And I was able to find a sailing chart. So here's a sailing chart. So today, if you're sailing, the best time is from May to about September. It's pretty safe. You have good winds. The skies are clear for the most part. But you start getting into October, it starts getting pretty marginal. You notice here that they really don't, at least back then, they didn't sail from November 11th to about March 5th. And you'll see Tishri, that month, is right about here. Yom Kippur. So weather's starting to get bad in the Mediterranean, and Paul shares his insights about the dangers that await them. I found this note from the Holman Illustrated Bible Dictionary. The ideal sailing season in the Mediterranean was from May 27th to September 14th, with an extension to outside limits from March 10 to November 10. As a result, sailing during the late fall and winter was reduced to bare essentials such as the carrying of vital dispatches, the transport of essential supplies, and urgent military movement. The severity of winter storms and the poor visibility due to fog and cloudiness made navigation before the compass most difficult. Why would cloudiness be a problem if you're trying to navigate? You don't get a good GPS signal? Can't see the stars. That's how they navigated, right? You gotta be able to see the heavens to be able to navigate. And this actually comes out in the story as well as we get further into the text. Got 15 seconds. We're not gonna get too far. What did Paul share with the centurion regarding their situation at sea? What did Paul say? It's dangerous. We may lose the cargo. We may lose our lives. Rough roads ahead. Tough sailing. Before we close, there's one thing in here that came out that I had never noticed as many times as I've read Acts. I never noticed this before. Who's on board besides the centurion and the pilot? The owner of the ship is on board. I never picked up on that. But the person that owns this huge ship is on board. Are they going to have some sway as to what happens? I would think so. This has got to be an expensive ship that holds 276 people. Anyway, this story unfolds. We'll continue on there next week. Thank you all for your comments.